Calm, focus, happiness. Reach new heights of calm, focus, and happiness here in Mindfulness Mode with me, your host and mindfulness life coach, Bruce Langford. Well, Mindful Tribe, we often talk about passion on the show. We often talk about being held in the palm of your hands through meditation and mindfulness. And today I have the man with me who can hold you in the palm of his hands. And well, he's a speaker, he's an author, he's an explorer, he's a mountain climber, and he's just a person who has an intense passion for life, and he has the greatest laugh of anybody I know, and you'll find out about his laugh in a couple of minutes. But he just recently spoke at the Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival, and he was the keynote speaker, and comments came in following that speech where he just captivated the audience with such an intensity. And one of the comments was, quote, passion. Let me get this, let me try this again. One of the comments was, quote, held the audience in the palm of your hands. You were brilliant, end of quote. And I wish I could have been there, because I know it was absolutely brilliant what he did in that moment with that audience. And we're going to talk more about the theme of that talk and how it tied in with actually the eighth person I had on the show way back in 2015. He was a mental health educator named Brent Seal, a good friend of Mike's. And that's kind of how this whole event ended up being kind of put together, because of the connection with Brent Seal. So I'm just thrilled to introduce you today to Mike Shosh. Mike, welcome to Mindfulness Mode again. You've been on the show before. I'm so excited to have you back. Mike, are you in mindfulness mode today?
I absolutely am. Thank you, Bruce, for having me. And it's awesome to be back here. I really enjoyed our first session. It was one of my absolute favorite podcasts. And so it's just a great thrill to be back and doing this again.
Well, it's a thrill for me too. So let's start, Mike, with talking about how this whole situation happened, with Brent Seal being one of my first interviewees on the show, mental health educator and an athlete and a mountain climber. And then he recommended that you contact me and become a guest on my show. Let's talk about how all of this happened, Mike. When was the first time you heard about mindfulness mode from Brent and thought of contacting me to be a guest?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great place to start, Bruce. And yeah, well, my story with Brent goes back about 15 years, actually. And he told me along the way, because he had a journey and he had a whole story, like his story is pretty inspiring in itself. And he told me along the way about his interview with you, his podcast that he did. And that was kind of in the earlier stages of him getting into public speaking and that sort of thing, and just how much of a good time he had. So when he told me, hey, you should contact Bruce and you should be on this podcast or look at being on this podcast, I thought, I listened to the podcast that you did with him, and I just thought, oh, this is a perfect fit. And just a little bit of background on Brent, for those who haven't listened to that podcast with you. So Brent and I, we go back when Brent was in university, and I was doing a leadership workshop at the university that he was a student at. Auditorium, about 100 people or something. And I remember the first break, Brent came up to me and he said, Mike, he said, how do you become a public speaker? And I said, well, you go out into the public and you speak. and then he said, well, then he turned around, he said, well, Mike, he's like, but I've got this challenge. I've been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I said, well, I don't know what came out of me, but I just said, so. And I think that was kind of the spark that just sort of fused our a friendship, a connection that would go on for the next 15 years in life And in the mountains, we climbed many mountains together. I watched Brent, I watched Brent overcome, many mental barriers, over the years, and also become a very accomplished mountaineer and speak to audiences. I mean, he spoke to audiences far greater than I ever spoke to in the subsequent years, and just became this inspiration. This huge inspiration, not only for the mental wellness community, but just beyond that for anyone. And it was a beautiful thing to see. And unfortunately, last September, Brent, he died on Mount Manaslu in the Himalaya, just below the summit there, around 8,000 meters, which hit the community very, very hard, and his family. And but this event that you mentioned in the introduction, that was meant to be an honor, like honoring Brent, who he was, what he stood for, and a way to just continue this legacy that he started about inspiring people to tap into their mental wellness, into that language of the heart, and not limit themselves based on what they believe they can or cannot do, but just to continue to take those steps. They don't have to be major leaps forward, but take steps forward. And that was what Brent was brilliant at. And that's kind of the message we want to continue to carry forward here.
Yeah, well, it's just incredible what Brent did to inspire people. He was a very inspiring man. And yeah, speaking of Brent, you can go back and listen to him on Mindfulness Mode, mindfulnessmode.com/008. He was my 8th guest. So go back and listen to that episode when you get a chance. But yeah, since that time back in 2015, he's just done so much, so many public speaking events, and so much to raise awareness of mental illness, and it's just phenomenal what he did. And then absolutely shocking what happened last September when he passed away, but his legacy continues. So tell us more about your speech and how that spoke to the people, how that reached the people through what you said.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, one of the things I talked about up there was, for that night, was this concept of the Bardo. The Bardo, this is a Tibetan term. It literally translates as place of transition, or a transitionary state between death and rebirth, between who we were and who we become. And we know that the Tibetans, they believe in reincarnation from lifetime to lifetime. But what they also believe is that we can experience many incarnations in one lifetime. So, and the Bardo is the place, well, if you think about it, the reason why we can experience those incarnations is because we're constantly changing, right? So we're not the same person we were when we were born, nor are we the same person we were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or perhaps even last week. And the Bardo is that place where we can choose, what part of me do I want to let go? What part of me that no longer serves me that I can just let be? And what part of me do I want to carry forward into who I become? And so this was something deeply linked to Brent, because I saw Brent go through challenge after challenge, after relapse after challenge, and use his illness not as a crutch or some sort of a life sentence, but as a springboard from which he could create new life. And he actually said something to me one day. He said, embrace the suffering. He's like, embrace the suffering, because that will help us overcome future sufferings, which I thought was very profound. So yes. Yeah, so one of the ideas behind this Bardo is that we can continue to move forward and not be limited by our past, right? Because what actually tethers us to the past or the future is what we keep inside of us. There was a quote I read at one time by, according to spinal surgeon, this renowned spinal surgeon, Dr. Hanscom. He said 90% of the people feeling some sort of chronic pain are still angry at the person or the situation that hurt them in the first place, but that the person they are actually angry at the most is themselves. So, what tethers us to the past or the future is what keeps us, or what we keep inside of us. And so the idea of this Tibetan concept of the Bardo is that, we choose what we want to be keeping inside of us, and what limits us, and what springs us forward, how we can create new life for ourselves in this lifetime.
Yeah, we definitely choose, and we choose whether we want to do the work in order to release this, in order to work through it. That's for sure. Tell us about the mood in the room when you began your speech. I know it was following a film that was shown. Maybe you can tell us a bit about the film.
Sure. Yeah. No, the film was called, this was the world premiere of the film about Brent, called A Life Inspired. And it was done by a good friend, James Frystack, who's an award-winning filmmaker and very talented. And the film itself was just about capturing, who Brent was, and what he stood for in terms of, not letting his limitations kind of like not letting him fall into his limitations, right?
Hmm.
But what could he do? How could he use those to move forward? And one of the speeches, or not speeches, but something he said towards the end of the film is just something that his dad had said to him. And shortly after he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, when he was still, just coming out of the psych ward, and his dad said to him, you can still live a great life. You can still live a great life. And those words, Brent talked about how that meant everything. Brent didn't actually even believe his dad when his dad spoke those words to him. But, over time, gradually, those words started to sink in more and more. And it allowed him to kind of believe in himself, right? To believe in himself, to give himself the permission to live a great life. And what did that look like? So those words were very important. So Brent will say, or he would say, you know, like, no matter who you are or where you are in life, if you can believe in something, like just give them the words, just believe in them. That little opening can mean a world for somebody. And believe in yourself, right? So yeah, so that was a very powerful thing about our message about the film, and just some of it kind of captured these beautiful images of where
Hmm.
Brent went. He summited to Mount Aconcagua, highest mountain in South America, Mount Denali, highest mountain in North America, and climbing all over the world, and then making his way to Everest base camp. To check out Mount Everest. That was kind of his next objective, which he was hoping to do this spring.
Hmm.
And then he went for Mount Manaslu last fall as a practice climb for
Okay.
Mount Everest. And then that's of course where he died.
Hmm.
But yeah, so it was a beautiful film, just kind of pulling these pieces together. The scenery, the mountains,
Wow.
the trajectory of Brent, how he turned into this very accomplished mountaineer over the years, and these messages that he would talk about as well.
Yeah. And Mike, is that film going to be made available to the public? Will we be able to see it?
It is, yeah. It's not available yet, but I think James is just figuring out how he would like to share it with the world, and
Hmm.
also kind of talking with with Brent's family as well, in terms of
Sure.
making sure that they're okay with that. And
Right. And if it
yeah.
is available, I would definitely put a link in the show notes so that Mindful Tribe, you can watch this beautiful, inspiring film. It would be just amazing to see that. Tell me, have you been, I'm sure you have, at events where Brent was the speaker? And take us there. What was that like?
I have. Well, actually, my friend and I, we that very first event that we did where I met Brent, that I mentioned, the gentleman who taught at SFU, Simon Fraser University, and we hosted another leadership event, again inspired by Brent and inspired by this idea of climbing the mountain, climbing your mental wellness mountain, basically. And so Brent was a speaker there, and yeah, it's funny, you could see him evolve over the years,
Hmm.
and just as he got more and more comfortable sharing about his story, and more comfortable on stage as well. Just how he captivated the audience and could inspire the audience to again just move outside of their head, like their own belief system. So yeah, I'm trying to think of one of the key messages that from that. This was a few years ago now, but I think a lot of it was going back to that what I mentioned there about embracing the suffering, embracing the struggle. When we do that, it actually gives us fuel to better deal with the future struggles and sufferings that we might encounter down the road.
Right,
So,
because so often we attempt to suppress the suffering, suppress the anger, the pain, and that's the exact opposite of what we need to do. Isn't that right?
absolutely. I mean, that's actually not a very good thing for anybody, because when we suppress, it's still energy, right? It's still
Yeah.
energy that has to come out. So it can manifest in different ways. It can create blockages in our systems, whether it's in our body or in our health. It could manifest into some sort of chronic disease. Like my point there about the surgeon, it could manifest as some sort of nervous system related, chronic pain. So the best thing is not to suppress. The best thing is to find a way to release it. Brent and I, we would often go hiking into nature to heal. That was one of the key coping mechanisms or ways to sort of release whatever we were dealing with. And that was key. I think nature has a beautiful way of allowing us to heal. We are nature at the end of the day. So putting ourselves in that environment and just being mindful, talking about being mindful, but just not letting the noise of society get to us, but just focus in on, how is my foot landing on the root or the rock, or just taking in the scenes or the sounds and all of that. I think that's very important. That gets us out of our head as well.
Yeah. And you told me a story about being out with Brent, and you both started laughing and laughing and laughing. Could you share that story with us?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because over the years we climbed all these big mountains and, had these big epic days, but I would say one of the most memorable days we ever had out there was not on some big mountain or not on some big epic day. It was on this little winter hike up to this cabin. And to get to that cabin, you had to go walk up all these switchbacks back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until you finally get there. And we had a beautiful conversation up all the switchbacks, And then when it was time to come down, that day I was on my skis and Brent was in snowshoes. And Brent's actually a much better skier than I am, but that day he happened to be in his snowshoes. So when it was time to come down, I would ski down a little bit, and then I'd wait for Brent and he'd kind of catch up on the snowshoes. And then I'd ski down a little bit more and he'd catch up on the snowshoes. And I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. and he, you know what? In all the years Brent and I have been climbing together, not once had he ever brought a crazy carpet, except for that day. And I don't know why he brought a crazy carpet, but there it was. And I said, okay, well, we have this crazy carpet. Do we have a little bit of short rope? And for some reason, Brent had packed a little bit of short rope that day. So I said, okay, well, let's try something here. Let's tie ourselves together by the waist. And I just pointed my skis down and we got going. We started picking up speed. And I remember coming flying down these switchbacks, coming up the bank. Brent would come down right behind me on the crazy carpet. He'd go flying right up the bank, almost flying right into the woods.
Yeah.
and then the rope would catch him at the last second and whip him down the next switchback. And we were laughing like so hard. We were laughing like children.
Yeah.
People coming up hiking up the trail, they could hear us before they could see us.
Yes.
They'd see me coming, flying down past them, just like laughing my head off, thinking, what is wrong with this guy? And then right behind me was this grown man on a crazy carpet, just laughing his head off. They were almost, jumping out of the way. So, it was, it was a good reminder about, actually, it taught me something very important. I realized many years later that, for us, it was never about actually climbing mountains. It was just about being out there, being out there with my friend. And so I think that's an important thing to think about.
For sure. The joy of sharing nature with a friend and just being able to let go, which is what you obviously did.
Let go. Yeah, totally let go. It's like, well, it kind of, it reminds me of this story. There was this story I heard once about a golden Buddha.
Yes.
Right. And there was this many years ago, there was this golden Buddha in a monastery, and the monks there, they heard that there were some people coming to take what they had. And they didn't want, them to take the golden Buddha. So they covered the whole thing with mud. They covered it with mud, and so it just looked like this big clump of mud. And there it stayed for many days, and then weeks and years, and years turned into decades, and then to a point where everybody forgot there was actually a golden Buddha under there. Except for one day when this young monk was sort of picking at the mud, and he kind of picked a piece off, and from underneath shone through this golden light. And you just reminded me of that, because I think life is like that, right? We have these moments where we just have this radiating light that shines through us. Whether it's walking through as I mentioned, one of the Bardos of our life with confidence, or whether it's just, like you said, embracing fully and openly a moment of pure joy. And the question becomes, what do we do in those moments? Do we cover it back up? Do we cover it back up with mud as though it never existed, or as though it was a figment of our imagination? Or do we, and we might do that out of anger or fear, or it's because of some expectation that society, expects of us. Or do we have the courage to practice and slowly, bit by bit, remove more and more of those pieces of mud, right? So I think that's an important. I mean, one of my favorite quotes of all time, Stephen Pressfield. He said, our job in this lifetime is not to shape ourselves into some ideal we imagine we ought to be. It is to realize who we already are, and then become it. Realize who you already are and become it.
Beautiful quote. Beautiful quote. I love reading Stephen Pressfield's work. Yeah, absolutely. On that day, which was just a few days ago, on Sunday, when you were delivering this speech at the Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival, tell us what your goal was with your speech.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of it was, to celebrate and honor what Brent, who Brent was. And that kind of connects to who we were in the mountains, which is about listening to that deep place within us, that language of the heart. And I think that's innately who we are. And so, finding that place of stillness again. We look at what's happening in the world right now. People are afraid. People are there's a lot of uncertainty. There's wars going on, people dying. It's like we're I mean, if you think back to that story about the golden Buddha, like, we're covering ourselves with mud right now.
Yes.
We are the golden Buddha, and we're covering everyone with mud, out of fear and out of violence and all the rest of it. So part of what the other night was about, it was about connecting again with that deep place within us. Just because I think that's what's going to, the more we can connect with that, the more we can kind of act out of that and that's going to send more constructive behaviors, choices, vibrations into the world. That's going to actually, I think, sort of help us out of this state that we're in right now. Especially coming out of COVID as well. You think about that, like, social isolation and, what that did to us psychologically. And so, so there's a lot going on. And I think the best way to, at least what I've found in my own experience, the best way to find meaning and just maintain my own sanity through all of this is to connect with that deep place again.
Yes.
Because it doesn't make sense to get wrapped up in the storm. That's not constructive. That's not going to actually help us. It's going to actually counter that. What's going to help us is connecting with that deep place within us again. That place of joy, that place of loving kindness, compassion, everything that makes us, feel good, from as a human being, like from that soul, basically our soul. If we can connect more with that and be that and practice that, that's what's going to be important here.
During the speech, you were connecting the minds and hearts of the audience, and through doing that, you had a time of meditation to reach a spirit of joy. Can you tell us about that?
Right. Yeah. No, that's that's really the crux of the whole thing. It was about connecting again back to who we are, innately are. And thinking about that story with Brent, when we were coming down there, just experiencing that total moment of joy. That's really what life is about.
Yeah.
So if we can open ourselves to those moments, it just kind of, it reinvigorates us from the deepest level, we can imagine, and just sort of allows us to connect again with that language of the heart that I think is very much needed today.
Yeah, very much needed. You're an author. I mentioned that in the intro, and your book is called A Story of Karma, Finding Love and Truth in the Lost Valley of the Himalaya. And when I first saw the book, A Story of Karma, I thought, oh, what a great title. But then, of course, that title has a double meaning. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the book. Well, the book is it's a journey, but it's a memoir of, what drew me to Nepal back in 2012, 10 years ago, and how I was led there to climb this pyramid mountain. That I thought that's the reason why I was going there, but everything kind of didn't happen that way. I got caught in a snowstorm at 17,000 feet, and the mule that was carrying my climbing gear ran away, and so all these things started unraveling, and I just couldn't understand why that was happening. I was feeling frustrated. I was feeling down. All this whole dream of climbing in that mountain and climbing in the Himalaya since I was a kid was being shattered before my eyes, but I just thought, I had to trust in kind of like the unfolding of events, and trusting in that led me to the most beautiful encounter of my life, which was meeting this little girl in this remote mountain village at 14,000 feet in elevation. Her name is Karma, and her sister, little Pemba, and their family. And my wife Chantal and I, we've created this beautiful relationship over 10 years now, seeing the girls grow up. But we met them when they were 7 and 3. And they just had such a passion to learn, such a passion to just, experience the world. And so we worked with the parents over the last several years, and, how can we work together in sort of a co-parenting way? Their parents bring in the best of what they know, Chantal and I bring in the best of what we know, and sort of both being there for the girls in that way. And we've grown very close. And that is a little bit of a synopsis about the book, and doing it in a way that they, don't forget who they are or where they're from. And at the same time, they can embrace this larger world around them as well.
The book was so memorable. It just drew me in, and I absolutely loved reading it. And when I read it, I knew that I had to interview you. I was so excited about interviewing you, and wow, it was just just incredible. Tell us more about what brings joy to your life, Mike.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's it. Well, I mean, the two things that spring to mind, one is, without a doubt, those two little girls
Yeah.
in the mountains, Karma and Pemba, and just
But it's because of what you were willing to do. It's because you were willing to listen to those signs and go with it. Other people might have thought, oh, well, that's interesting. But then they might have thought, well, I need to continue doing whatever I'm doing. And you just allowed those messages to influence you, didn't you?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think that's heavily tied into that deeper intelligence that we're talking about. That I
Yeah.
guess you could call it like an earth intelligence, or heart intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
that we just know. I mean, that's where we feel at home. And it's when the mind starts getting too much in the driver's seat, that's when things start to swerve out of control. If I had let the mind stay in the driver's seat back in 2012, who knows what would have happened? I would have said, no, I got to force this climb through, or maybe I would have stayed frustrated in my head and not paid attention to the little signs. Maybe we would have had the encounter with Karma there in the village, but maybe I would have just said, oh, well, that was nice, and let's just move back home or whatever. Who knows? But when we open ourselves to that deeper intelligence, that heart intelligence, then we can start to pick up on these, we call them synchronicities, or we can tap deeper into our own, into what we call the intuition. And that's when things start coming together. We know that we're following the heart intelligence when we can feel and see things coming together in a synchronistic way, because nature moves that way, right? Nature moves
Yes.
in its own, everything is, I mean, we can look at a tree and think of it as an isolated tree, but it's not. It's, if you were to look a few inches under the ground, you would see that it is a highly intelligent, interconnected web of, you could almost say one organism, just feeding, everything's communicating, feeding itself, reallocating resources. So I think that's much the way that we operate as well. We're directly connected. I mean, we are nature, as I said, we're directly connected into that. We fool ourselves if we believe that we're not. And by tapping into that deeper intelligence, that's when we start to see these kind of natural synchronicities emerge. And it's back to your question, that's what brings joy.
Yes.
When we're tapping into that, whether it's coming sliding down the mountain with the person that we're close to, or just whether we let it lead us to these other beautiful connections that might form in some way, and connection with ourselves. It leads us to the connection within ourselves. And I think that's, again, going back to the earlier conversation, that's what we need more of right now.
Definitely.
We don't need more siloed behavior, or more sort of isolation, or more separateness, or more division. What we need is, we need to realize that we're in this together, and that we are all part of this together, and that what I do affects everyone else, and what everyone else does affects me. And so, we might as well realize that and connect, with that fundamental truth.
Tell us how you experienced synchronicities as a child.
Well, okay, you're asking me to.
I'm asking you a tough question. I can see that from the body language. And So synchronicities, I just feel as though you, as a human being, you just live and breathe this. Like it comes so naturally to you to just feel these synchronicities and act on them. And so I'm just curious, when was the first time in your life when you experienced this, when you knew that you were one with the universe, you were one with humanity and one with nature?
I don't know if I can pinpoint it to a single moment, but there were definitely recurring moments again and again and again. I mean, I think it's an ongoing practice, to be honest.
Sure.
I think it's a continual, even now, you know,
Yeah.
reminders of being out there, being in the mountains, hiking on trails. You know, if I don't get that sort of feedback, it's hard to remain grounded. And it doesn't have to be in some, vast nature. It's just maybe sometimes it's about sitting next to a tree somewhere, wherever we
Yeah.
are, and listening to that. But yeah, I can't, I don't know if I can pinpoint a moment, but I just know that it's just, we know when we're on the path. It almost feels like sometimes, when we're walking, if you imagine walking this path, you may not know where the path is going, but you're on a path where the mind might say, oh no, we got to go this way, or I know we're trying to get over there, so maybe we'll take this shortcut, or I can see better, if I look that way, so maybe we should go that way. And it involves, and then we get into the bushwhacking, and it gets all messy, and especially if we start forcing our way in that direction, then it could lead to a lot of suffering for ourselves and for others as well. And it's not to say that staying on the path is easy, or it's just like this easy journey, but it just feels, it's like rowing with the current versus against it, and trusting that that current is moving in the right way.
Yeah, you seem to be able to just allow life to happen and embrace it, embrace it. You laugh so much and have such a great laugh. And how does that seem to, I guess what I'm asking is, have you always been that way? Have you always been able to just let go and laugh and have humor in your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's
It's just as natural as that, isn't it?
yeah, like not all the time, of course.
Yeah,
But I mean, I don't know. I think if you think about what got us here, there's another Tibetan saying I heard some time ago. If you could stack the bones of our ancestors, they would be higher than Mount Everest. So you think about like how many people lived their lives in a way that allowed us to be here, and even you and me having this conversation right now, and just the opportunities that we have in front of us. I mean, it took thousands, tens of thousands of lives, and over many, many, many years, right? And think about what they struggled with, and what actions they took, and the courage that they had, and all of that, and then it, now we're here. And so, if you think about it in that way, it's like, how could we not be joyful by being here?
Yeah. Mike, I'm curious, what's your call to action? Where should we go next? As far as, Brent talked about mental health and wellness, and you share the message of joy, and this message that you share in your beautiful book that you've written called Finding Karma, or it's called A Story of Karma, rather. Tell us where to go next.
Well, there's actually something Brent said to me once, which was, find that thing that brings you alive. And I think that's really what it's about. It's finding well, there's another quote that actually comes to mind too, by Rumi, which, he said, what in life is calling you? What in your life is calling you? When all the noise is silenced, and the meetings adjourned, the lists laid aside, and the wild iris blooms by itself in the dark forest. What in your life is calling you? What still pulls on your soul? And I think that's really what it's about. It's about meditating on that. And we know what it is. We know within our heart what it is. We may not know within our mind, but we know within our heart what it is. And I think the more we listen to that and take steps towards that, the more things will become clear. It may not happen overnight, but sometimes it's about just moving in that direction.
Yeah, I love that. What in life is calling you? And we have to stop and listen. And like you said, we already know, but a lot of times we don't stop and pay attention.
Totally. Yeah. Or our mind gets in the way, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you could take somebody and put them in the most beautiful setting, the most calming, natural setting, natural environment. And if they're caught in their mind, they're going to be thinking about, oh, I gotta do that next deal, or I gotta, negotiate with that person, or I gotta scheme on this thing over here. Like they're going to be totally, again, under the mud. They won't even be able to see that. So I think it's, again, like tapping, practicing, having the courage to go deeper. What in your life is calling you? And then just starting there.
Yeah. Great place to start. And Mindful Tribe, you can hear my interview with Mike when I interviewed him about the book. That was back episode 611. So mindfulnessmode.com/611. Final words, Mike, before we say goodbye. What thoughts would you like to leave Mindful Tribe with?
Well, I wrote a little poem. Maybe I'll share that.
Please do. I love
Um,
this poem, and I think that would be a perfect way to end this conversation.
it kind of sums up everything that we talked about, and it
Yes.
was actually inspired by well, it was inspired by many things, but one of the things it was inspired by was Brent.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave us with this: stillness. Stillness. It is the beginning and the end of all things. Like the pool of water returned to its natural state, or the tiny droplet taking rest on a delicate leaf. It is the eye of the deer, a dark and endless orb as deep as the universe, filled with a billion stars. It is the great owl, extending from branch and trunk, seeing from behind its yellow eyes, hearing what cannot be heard. Heavenly clouds basking before the golden sun, a great snowy mountain, still as stone. Rays of morning light dipping through the treetops. It speaks the language of the earth, a language that has been shaped and carved and created over 100 million years. It is the language of the heart. It is where our souls come alive. It is what we call home. And so as long as I draw breath, I will do my best to move toward that stillness, to be that stillness. For that is where I find myself. That is where we find each other again.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And on that note, thank you so much for being on the show again, Mike, and all the very best to you.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Yeah, it's been a pleasure being here again and having this conversation. And I look forward to seeing where we go from here.
Awesome. Bye now.